What I'm about to share with you today might challenge something you've believed for years about your blood pressure, and I need you to listen carefully because this is where most people unknowingly go wrong. You've probably been told the same thing again and again: cut salt, avoid fried food, take your medication on time, be careful with what you eat. And maybe you've actually done those things. Maybe you stopped adding extra salt. Maybe you switched to healthier options. Maybe you've been consistent with your pills. And yet, when you check your blood pressure, the numbers still don't sit where they should. That creates a very specific kind of frustration because it starts to feel like your body is not responding, like something inside you is just not cooperating. But here's the truth that almost nobody explains clearly. Blood pressure is not only about what you remove from your diet, it's also about what your body is missing. And one of the most important missing pieces, especially after the age of 60, is potassium. Now, I know what you're thinking because I hear this all the time. This is going to be about bananas, right? No, bananas are not the problem, but they are also not the full solution. And if bananas are the only potassium-rich food you think about, then you're missing the foods that can actually make a meaningful difference. And today, I'm going to show you 3 of them. But before we get there, I need to explain something in a way that actually makes sense. Because once you understand this, everything else starts to click. Inside your body, sodium and potassium are constantly balancing each other. Sodium tends to pull water into your bloodstream and tighten your blood vessels. Potassium does almost the opposite. It helps your body release excess sodium through urine, and it helps your blood vessels relax. So if sodium is high and potassium is low, your blood pressure naturally rises. And here's the problem. Most seniors focus only on lowering sodium. Very few focus on increasing potassium in a safe and consistent way. That creates an imbalance that keeps blood pressure elevated even when someone feels like they're doing everything right. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Anita. Anita was 70, very disciplined, and honestly more careful than most people her age. She had already reduced her salt intake, she rarely ate fast food, she was walking regularly. But her blood pressure readings stayed stubbornly high. Not dangerously high, but consistently higher than expected. And that bothered her. When we looked closely at her meals, the issue became very clear. Her diet had become restrictive but not supportive. She had removed many of the obvious sources of sodium, but in the process, her meals had become very low in potassium-rich whole foods. It was a pattern built on avoidance, not nourishment. And this is exactly where food number 3 comes in. Food number 3 is cooked spinach. Not a few raw leaves on a plate that you push aside, not a decorative topping, real cooked spinach. Here's why this matters. When spinach is cooked, it shrinks in volume. What used to be a large bowl of raw leaves becomes a small, manageable portion. But the nutrients don't disappear. They concentrate. That means you can eat a realistic amount and still get a meaningful boost of potassium. And for many seniors, this is incredibly important because appetite changes. Chewing becomes more difficult. Large portions become less appealing. Cooked spinach solves that problem. It's soft, easy to eat, and can be added to foods people are already comfortable with. Eggs, soups, lentils, simple meals. And it doesn't push you toward sugar or processed snacks. Anita didn't start eating massive portions. She simply added cooked spinach a few times a week. Sometimes with breakfast, sometimes with dinner. Within a couple of weeks, her meals started looking different, more balanced, more complete. And that small shift began supporting her blood pressure in a way restriction alone never could. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Because food number 2 doesn't just provide potassium, it solves a problem that quietly pushes blood pressure higher every single day. And that problem is hunger. Let me explain. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people eating light but not feeling satisfied. They eat small meals, low-fat options, quick snacks. And then a few hours later, hunger kicks in. That's when they reach for crackers, packaged food, salty snacks, things that undo all their earlier effort. So when I recommend food number 2, I'm not just thinking about potassium. I'm thinking about stability. It's the key factor we need for long-term success. Food number 2 is beans, and I don't think people fully understand how powerful beans are in this situation. They contain potassium, yes, but they also contain fiber. And that fiber slows digestion, keeps you fuller longer, and stabilizes your energy. That matters more than most people realize. Because when your meals keep you satisfied, you're far less likely to go searching for salty, processed foods later in the day. Let me tell you about someone I'll call Rashid. Rashid was 75 and living alone. His meals were simple and convenient. Toast in the morning, sandwich at lunch, something quick for dinner. He didn't feel like he was overeating, but his blood pressure stayed elevated. When we looked closer, the pattern was obvious. His meals were easy, but they were dominated by sodium-heavy processed foods and lacked potassium-rich whole foods. So we made one simple change. A few times a week, he replaced his usual lunch or dinner with a bean-based meal. Sometimes lentils, sometimes chickpeas, sometimes white beans with vegetables. Nothing complicated. It was actually a very simple and straightforward adjustment. But something important happened. He stopped feeling hungry late at night. He stopped reaching for snacks, and his overall sodium intake dropped without him even thinking about it. That's the hidden power of beans. They don't just add something good, they help remove something harmful. And when that happens consistently, blood pressure starts to respond. Now, if what you've heard so far is already making you rethink your approach, stay with me. Because food number one is where most people's assumptions completely fall apart. This is the food people avoid. This is the food people argue about. And this is the food that, when used correctly, can quietly become one of the most powerful additions to your routine. Let me tell you about Farzana. Farzana was 68 and extremely cautious about her diet. At some point, she became convinced that all carbohydrates were bad. So she avoided rice, avoided potatoes, avoided anything she thought might raise her blood sugar or weight. But here's what she didn't realize. While she was avoiding these foods, she was relying more on packaged, low-fat, and diet foods. Foods that were often high in sodium. So her potassium intake dropped. Her sodium intake stayed higher than she thought. And her blood pressure reflected that imbalance. She wasn't careless. In fact, she was being extremely cautious with her choices. She was misinformed. And unfortunately, that is a very common problem I see every day. And that brings us to food number one. But before I reveal it, I want you to think about this for a second. What if the food you've been avoiding is actually the one your body has been missing? And what if using it the right way could change the way your meals support your blood pressure every single day? That's exactly what I'm going to show you next. Food number one is a simple baked potato with the skin on, and I know that might surprise you. Because for years, potatoes have been pushed into the avoid this category, especially for older adults trying to manage weight, blood sugar, or overall health. But here's where context changes everything. I'm not talking about French fries. I'm not talking about a potato covered in butter, cheese sauce, bacon bits, and salt. I'm talking about a plain baked potato, or a lightly prepared potato with the skin intact, used as a real food replacement for something far worse. Because when you look at it objectively, a potato in its natural form is one of the most practical and overlooked sources of potassium available. It's affordable, it's familiar, and most importantly, it's something people can actually eat consistently without feeling like they're on a restrictive plan. This matters more than people realize, because the best food for your blood pressure is not the one with the highest number on a nutrition chart. It's the one you can realistically include in your life again and again. Let me take you back to Farzana. When we reintroduced potatoes into her meals, nothing extreme happened overnight. She didn't suddenly transform her entire diet. She didn't follow a strict plan. She simply started using a baked potato a few times a week as a replacement. Instead of reaching for packaged sides or processed foods, she had something warm, satisfying, and nourishing. And something very important changed. She stopped feeling deprived. And when that feeling disappeared, she stopped searching for snacks later in the evening. That alone reduced a large portion of hidden sodium in her routine. Over time, her meals became more balanced, not perfect, but better. And that's what your body responds to. Now, I want to make something very clear, because this is where people often misunderstand everything we've talked about. These three foods are not magic. They don't work because of a single number. They work because they help reshape your entire eating pattern. Cooked spinach gives your body a concentrated, easy source of potassium in a form that fits into simple meals. Beans provide potassium and fiber, helping you stay full and avoid the cycle of snacking on high-sodium foods. And a baked potato gives you a satisfying, practical alternative to processed sides that quietly push your blood pressure higher. But their real power comes from what they replace, not just what they add. Because if you add these foods on top of a diet that is still dominated by processed meals, salty snacks, and convenience foods, the effect becomes limited. It's like trying to move forward while holding yourself back at the same time. This is why I keep coming back to one idea. Substitution, not decoration. Replace the chips with a potato. Replace the processed lunch with beans. Replace the salty side with spinach. That's how the pattern begins to shift. And once the pattern shifts, your body starts responding in a way that feels natural, not forced. Now let's talk about something practical, because this is where change actually happens. Imagine a normal day. Breakfast could be something as simple as eggs with cooked spinach. Lunch could include a bean-based meal that keeps you satisfied for hours. Dinner could be a piece of chicken or fish, vegetables, and a baked potato. Nothing complicated, nothing expensive, nothing unrealistic. But that one day looks very different from a routine filled with processed foods. And when days like that repeat, something important begins to happen. Your potassium intake rises naturally. Your sodium intake decreases without constant effort. Your hunger becomes more stable. Your energy becomes more consistent. And your blood pressure begins to reflect those internal changes, not instantly, but steadily. And steady is what leads to lasting results. Now, I know some of you are wondering how quickly this works. And the honest answer is, it depends on where you're starting. If your current routine is very high in sodium and low in potassium, you may begin to notice changes relatively quickly. But if your blood pressure has been elevated for years, or if other factors like stress, sleep, or medications are involved, then food becomes one piece of a bigger picture. And that's completely okay. Please don't worry about it. Because even one piece, when used consistently, can make a real difference. But there's something important I need to say here. Do not use this as a reason to stop your medication on your own. I've seen people make that mistake. They start eating better, they see slight improvements, and they assume they no longer need treatment. Then their numbers rise again, sometimes without obvious symptoms. If your readings improve, that's a positive sign. But any changes to medication should be done with your doctor, based on consistent data. Food supports your body. It doesn't replace medical care without proper guidance. And there's another safety point that could protect someone watching this right now. Increasing potassium is not safe for everyone. If you have kidney problems or conditions that affect how your body handles potassium, or if you're on certain medications, increasing potassium without guidance can be harmful. So it's important to know your situation before making major changes. Because the goal is not just improvement, the goal is safe improvement. Now let's address one of the biggest hidden mistakes people make. They add one healthy habit, but keep everything else the same. They eat spinach, but still rely on processed meals. They eat beans, but continue snacking on salty foods. They eat a potato, but load it with high sodium toppings. So the overall pattern doesn't change enough to make a difference. And that leads to frustration, because it feels like nothing is working. But the reality is, the body responds to patterns, not isolated actions. This is why even small, consistent changes matter more than occasional perfect ones. Start simple, change one meal, then build from there. Let it become normal. Let it become sustainable. Because the best approach is not the most extreme one, it's the one you can live with. Let me leave you with something I tell many of my patients. You are not powerless when it comes to your blood pressure. Even in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, your daily choices still influence what's happening inside your body. Your food influences how tight or relaxed your blood vessels are. It influences how much sodium your body holds on to. It influences your energy, your hunger, and the overall environment your blood pressure exists in. So the next time you build your plate, don't just ask yourself what you should remove. Ask yourself what your body might be missing. Because sometimes the biggest improvement doesn't come from cutting things out. It comes from finally putting the right things back in. Cooked spinach, beans, a simple baked potato with the skin on. 3 foods, simple foods. But when used consistently, they can help shift your entire routine in the right direction. And over time, that shift is what your body responds to. If this helped you even a little, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the people who need this information the most are often the ones not searching for it. And sometimes one small change, repeated consistently, is all it takes to start moving in a better direction.